And what's interesting about it is I was a philosophy major in college. And to become a patent attorney, you have to have a bachelor's of science degree. And my philosophy major did not provide one credit towards a bachelor's of science degree. So after law school, I had to go back to school to get the equivalent of the bachelor's of science in biology and chemistry. So I did that, and I took and passed the patent bar. And for a decade, I was a patent attorney. So what I didn't realize at the time was it was actually excellent venture training, because for essentially 10 years, every day someone came into my office to essentially pitch me their idea. And so with his support and encouragement, I, after a decade, left behind the practice of law, and I took over Enjoy. And my first day as an entrepreneur, I will never forget the controller said, "We have 8 employees. We're in litigation with the FDA, and we'll be out of cash in 2 weeks." So that was my welcome
Welcome
to,
package.
and so that's where I developed this idea or concept of being a karmapreneur. And so my thought was, first of all, I started to notice something in some of the founders that I was meeting, which was like, I'll frame it this way.
Hello, digital warriors, and welcome back to the Forge of Unicorn podcast. Today, we have a special guest, somebody that made a journey that is amazing. Craig Weiss. Craig started as a attorney in a patent brand, and he became a unicorn creator with the company Enjoy. And then he became a venture capital, went through a lot of lessons learned. He developed some interesting concept merging karma and entrepreneurship, something that for sure we will deep dive. Actually, is the managing partner at Flagstaff Venture, and is looking to share with us a journey that is, let's say, holistic. So, without further ado, Craig, welcome with us.
Thank you so much, Michelle. It's an honor to be a guest. I appreciate it.
The honor is on this side, Craig, because when we have a guest like you with so wealth of experience, we don't know even where to start. So, typically, what we do is let the guest introduce himself and say what or where you want to start on this adventure, because it was an adventure starting from your attorney journey, isn't it?
It's definitely an adventure. I feel like, in so many ways, my whole life has been a bit of an adventure. Like all of us, you don't really think too much about your childhood being unusual because it's the only childhood you know. So it's only until you get to be much older and more life experience and meet other people where you start to realize that certain aspects of your childhood are maybe somewhat unique. And so I've come to realize that I grew up in a very unusual family. So my parents were married for 50 years. Um, my mother was a federal judge who gave birth to 7 children across the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. And so I was number 6 of 7, and I had 5 much older siblings who were very accomplished. So 2 PhDs, 2 professional world ranked tennis players. 3 of the 5 were IP attorneys. So, um, and my father had been a patent attorney for 50 years. He was the youngest ever managing patent attorney at IBM. I was born in Poughkeepsie, New York, and then he moved the family out to Phoenix in the 1970s to be general patent attorney for Motorola when I was just a baby. And so I grew up here. But my 5 much older siblings were 8 to almost 14 years older than me. And so I joke often, most of us grew up in a home with 2 adults called parents. I had seven, my 2 parents and my 5 much older siblings. So 7 opinions, 7 perspectives, and it was also, it was clear to me I was not going to outsmart, Gail or Jeff, or, out athlete Mark or Farley, or, outwork my sister Felicia. So it wasn't entirely clear to me what my path was going to be. But because my father had his own intellectual property law firm, it was sort of understood that I was going to be an IAP attorney and go work, with the family business. And what's interesting about it is I was a philosophy major in college, and to become a patent attorney, you have to have a bachelor's of science degree. And my philosophy major did not provide one credit towards a bachelor's of science degree. So after law school, I had to go back to school to get the equivalent of the bachelor's of science in biology and chemistry. So I did that, and I took and passed the patent bar. And for a decade, I was a patent attorney. So what I didn't realize at the time was it was actually excellent venture training, because for essentially 10 years, every day someone came into my office to essentially pitch me their idea, right? And it wasn't for investment, it was to see whether it was good enough, in my opinion, to qualify to get a patent. But the analysis was not too dissimilar, because I still had to evaluate, is this a good idea? Is this a good person I'm talking to? Are they a real sort of person of substance who's going to be capable of following through and paying our bills, and all of those things? And occasionally, we met very interesting people, and sometimes we would take equity in their companies if they couldn't pay our legal bills. And one day, a client came into one of my middle brothers, Mark, who's also a patent attorney, and described this new technology. This is literally 20 years ago, in 2005, and the new technology was vaporizing nicotine, what we call vaping today. And so my brother did some investigation, went to China, and did some research, and he founded this company called Enjoy in late '06, and as a venture of our law firms. And because we were IP attorneys, my brother thought, well, you know, let me, bring in some friends who have business experience, so they can run the, company. And company does about 300 grand in '07, 3 million in '08, 7 million in '09, really taking off. For me, sort of the whole trajectory of my life shifted in 2008. My father passed away that year, and he was the rainmaker of our law firm, and kind of the rock that our whole family could count on. And so when he passed away, it was the first time in my life I felt like real fear. I had a 15-month-old, and it was a scary time for me, and I felt like I was on the tightrope, and they yanked the safety net, and it was like the stakes got very high. And so I started reading business books and joining like CEO organizations, but focused on the law firm. How do I keep this law firm going? And I'd lived abroad for about 4 years in Israel. And so in Jerusalem in the year 2000, 25 years ago, I met this very unique guy who had been born in Philadelphia, but when he was about 8, his parents had moved to Israel. So he spoke English like a Native American, but culturally he was probably a little more Israeli than American. And we became friends, but I realized early on he was not like the rest of us. He had taken 3 companies from founding to IPO in his 20s. I've never even heard of anyone doing this. And he built Israel's first unicorn, so he's the only one who can say that. And today he has, I think, a $250 million venture capital fund of his own in Israel. And so after my father passed away in 2008, Ellie kind of transitioned from friend to mentor. And at some point said to me, "Hey, this electronic cigarette thing seems to be a big deal. Your family founded one of these companies. Craig, how come you're not more involved?" And that planted the seed. And I'm reading the business books, and it wasn't like the law firm was a safe, stable bet anymore, with my father, out of the picture. And so at some point, Ellie suggested to me that, maybe I should run the company. And had anybody else made that suggestion, I would have just dismissed it out of hand. Like, me, the philosophy major, this is manufacturing, distribution, regulatory, marketing. I don't know anything about those things. I didn't even study them at school. And so, um, but because it was Ellie who had made the suggestion, and he was such a person of substance who had accomplished so much, and, was at the time, he was one of the 10 partners at Benchmark, which was I think, first institutional investors in Twitter and eBay. So he was a serious guy. So I was like, well, he evaluates talent for a living. If he's telling me that he thinks I can do it, maybe I can. And so
Mhm.
with his support and encouragement, I, after a decade, left behind the practice of law, and I took over Enjoy. And my first day as an entrepreneur, I will never forget the controller said, "We have 8 employees. We're in litigation with the FDA, and we'll be out of cash in 2 weeks." So that was my welcome
Welcome
to an
package.
yeah. So um, I it was a scary time. I probably called Ellie more or less every day for the better part of 2 years. And they were short calls, but what should I do about this? Or this is kind of what I'm thinking. What do you think? Um, and our vendors became kind of our lines of credit. I remember my first phone calls as the CEO were, "Hi, yeah, my name is Craig. You don't know me. I'm the new, president and then later CEO. Um, we owe you money. I know you don't know me and you have no reason to believe me or trust me, but I promise we will pay you, but we can't pay you today. And, as soon as we get paid, we will pay you." And so, um, and eventually, we we defeated the FDA in federal court, which kind of established the legal framework for the industry. Um, Ended up raising about 200 million in private equity. Got the company to $1 billion valuation in about 3.5 years. Manufactured about 80 million units of our product and distributed that in about 130,000 retail locations. So all 50 states, most of Europe. We had commercials in the Super Bowl in a bunch of markets, billboards in Times Square, double decker buses in London, and in February of 2014, we closed our Series D, which was 74 million at $1 billion pre-money valuation from Fidelity, Morgan Stanley, and Bain Capital. And just as I was being congratulated for, I think, what was the third homegrown unicorn in Arizona at the time, after GoDaddy and Discount Tire, uh, the wheels kind of came off. Juul became this dominant product in the marketplace, a product that looked nothing like a cigarette, that had a lot of youth appeal, which was terrible. And we had a product that looked exactly like a cigarette, designed to appeal to an adult smoker. And very quickly, the market shifted, and my new investors said, "Hey, we invested on your projections. You're missing your numbers. What's going on?" And we were not going to hit those numbers anymore. And so I was gently encouraged to go from CEO to executive chairman. Did that for a year, cycled off the board, but gently kind of nudged out. So um, I, uh, I've been guest lecturing for about a decade now at Arizona State University's business school, WP Carey. And when I get to this part of the story, I have a picture of it's like a claymation picture of a businessman impaled on a unicorn. And I said, that's going to be the cover of my story, is going to be me impaled on a unicorn. So uh,
Yeah, a recurring story that I heard many times for a lot of people that went through the investment.
Yeah, and it was an amazing learning experience. We ended up with offices in 3 continents. We had 130 employees. I recruited the 17th Surgeon General of the United States to my board of directors. I testified in front of the United States Senate. I met with FDA 4 times. I was front page of the Wall Street Journal. All of these different, exciting things along the way. Um, and then all of a sudden, it was over. And so, okay, what comes next? And it took me probably a year or so to find my footing. And I founded and co-founded a couple of companies. One of those got venture backed in 2020, and it, we got venture backed really just as COVID was hitting. And so in 21, I had to go out and raise additional capital a little earlier than I had wanted to, in the middle of COVID. And a friend of mine introduced me to about 10 VCs. And my joke is I forgot how much I hated VCs. All the cliches were true.
Yeah,
Uh, 10 young, dumb guys who had never run a business in their life and, thought the world runs like an Excel spreadsheet. And
yeah,
so I was complaining to another friend of mine, and he says, "Well, if you think they're all idiots, why don't you do it yourself?" And so 4 years ago, I launched in 2021 venture capital law firm. And so um, I focused on early stage consumer. And my thinking was I built $1 billion consumer brand. I'm not a fintech guy. I'm not a SaaS guy. I'm not a cyber guy. Um, and consumer is very interesting to me for a couple of reasons. One is it's 2/3 of US GDP. That's why we're called consumers. So, you know, and it's a huge part of the economy. And it's in some ways overlooked for a lot of reasons. One is the investing world sort of fell in love with enterprise SaaS because the margins are very high and you have recurring revenue. And building a brand is part psychology, part philosophy, part magic. It's not just numbers on a spreadsheet. And so, and if it's a physical product, and look, there's consumer brands that don't have a physical product. Uber is a consumer brand without a physical product.
Yes.
Um, but if it has a physical product, as Enjoy did, there's a whole new layer of complexity because then you've got manufacturing, distribution, all of these things, point of sale, packaging, shipping. I mean, there's all of these complexities that you don't have in lots of other areas of the economy. And so I had to navigate all of that complexity when I was the CEO at Enjoy. So as an investor, I had a big advantage, which is that when I would meet with founders, um, I would always tell that joke about how I forgot how much I hated VCs, and they would always laugh because they hate them too,
Yes.
and for good reason because most founders who've had interactions with VCs have been very disappointed, and so I had an advantage with them because I could relate to them and they could relate to me because I still think of myself as a founder and an operator, and I could be helpful to them because instead of asking sort of dumb questions, I could ask smarter questions about the challenges that I assumed they were facing, given the ones that I had faced, and so we were very fortunate. The first company I invested in at a $21 million pre-money valuation was essentially an app for hiring a lawyer, so consumer legal. So having been a recovering attorney and in the consumer space, I had some ability to evaluate it, and so I invested at a $21 million pre-money valuation, $100,000 personally before I launched my fund, but I moved that in as my GP contribution. And 4 months later, they became a unicorn. They raised 80 at 920 pre. And I sold a third of my 100 grand for 760 grand in the secondary market. And then last year sold 2/3 of the remaining position for $1 million at a $1.2 billion valuation. So I think we're still sitting on about a $600,000 position. So I got to check both boxes. I built a unicorn, my first investment's a unicorn. And I don't know too many VCs who get to sort of check those two. And so I ended up investing in about 11 companies in my first fund, and have that one unicorn. I have another company that is moving in a very positive direction, invested 1.2 million at around a $25 million valuation. They just raised money just shy of $150 million valuation. So that's also moving in a very positive direction. So yeah, I'm 4 years in, and it's my third act. So, patent attorney for a decade, entrepreneur for a decade, and hopefully now VC. And so it's been a lot of fun. It's also been, of course, very challenging. Launching a venture capital fund in June of 21 is sort of like launching real estate in 2008. I probably couldn't have picked a worse possible year and month to become a venture capitalist. But
Yes.
yeah, hopefully things are the economy's starting to turn around. We'll see if the Fed starts lowering interest rates again at some point, and things will start to improve.
For sure, something will change soon because there are signs, there are reports, there are close data in the second quarter of 2026. Most probably, something will change. So I don't know. It seems that something related to AI is starting to become more clear to a lot of people, a lot of consumers, people that they were guessing probably due to social biases and hyper marketing that AI could do something more than what it is actually capable to do with a reliable degree of customer satisfaction. But yeah, this is something that I guess has to unfold. And so we cannot forecast the future, at least. I am not a magician. I don't have the magic crystal balls. I have only a bald head and I cannot see the future on it, on the mirror, unfortunately. And so I guess we have to wait. But in your story, there is a interesting aspect. I guess that the two traits that move you from an attorney to an entrepreneur were coaching with your friend Ellie and radical candor, the transparency to discuss with your employees and with your customers and with the people that they were at the end owning your credit lines. Something that was a tough message. And you were able to negotiate it through candor and also to coach. Something that in your narrative, it seems that reemerge when you said, I was providing a question to these new founders. And questions are typically the best tool of a coach. So, also, as a coach, you have the experience as an attorney. Isn't this formula that you went through the grinder since the early stage as a guy that was with a master degree on philosophy? Then you have to get a master degree in science. And so you have to get the double master degree. And then you have to do 10 years of attorney, understanding how people are asking for patents. Is this the real recipe of a successful CEO in whatever industry? You cannot have only a good idea. You need to grind your skin in the game.
Well, I'll say a few things. One is there's the two main things people talk about are the great idea and execution. And what I can tell you is that everybody that I respect include, will say, and I agree with this statement, if you have to choose between the two, we'll take execution. I'll take execution of a bad idea, great execution of a bad idea over poor execution of a great idea. Without execution, you've got nothing. So it doesn't matter how good the idea is. And so that's a lesson that when you're an operator, you learn because you realize, oh, those great ideas that I have aren't working, or they're not working as well as I had thought because this thing called the real world interferes. And,
Yeah.
there's problems, there's challenges. What do you mean the shipment didn't arrive? And all of these things that happen in the real. So definitely the years sort of grinding it out force you to focus on execution and making sure that that what you're trying to accomplish gets done in some way, shape, or form. Maybe not it doesn't happen the way you would have envisioned it originally. Um, the second thing, back to your point about the questions, I have two kids who are teenagers now, and um, both me and my wife have really focused them on curiosity. Um, because questions come from curiosity. And if you don't have curiosity, maybe it's because you think you have all the answers or you already know everything, or just, you're not that interested or intrigued in whatever the subject is. But if you sort of have, if you cultivate a healthy amount of curiosity, then for me, you could drop me out of an airplane anywhere on the planet and into any circumstance, and whoever I would meet, I'm a curious person. So it's just like, so tell me a little bit about your life and how did you get to be you? And, so why are you interested in cars and engines and, some of the things that you and I have talked about before. So it doesn't have to be something that I have some passion for. In many ways, I'm more curious about the things that I don't have passion for, because, wow, you're passionate about this thing that I'm not passionate about. Why? Tell me, how did you become so passionate about this subject? And so for, I think, you know, I once heard Peter Diamandis speak, and, he's a brilliant a person who, he's written books like Abundance and Bold, and, founded Singularity University. And this was maybe a decade ago or so. And he said he had dropped off his twin 5-year olds, I think, for kindergarten or first grade or something. And he said, the last thing I said to my kids was ask good questions. He said, because we are pretty much at a place in time where all of the answers are out there. And he was saying this before ChatGPT, when we just had the internet. But
Uh-huh.
but but now with AI, all of the answers are out there. So he basically said the way we're going to differentiate between humans is who can ask the best questions. And so I've thought a lot about that sort of framing, and I think it's even more accurate today than when he said it 10 years ago. It really does
Yes,
come
indeed.
down to, are you asking the right questions? And the other piece to it too is, the reason why I started with curiosity as opposed to question asking is because I think all of us probably at some point or another have met someone who might, at least at first, seem like a really good question asker. But then you realize they're either not listening for the answers, or they don't really care what the answers are, or they're just sort of in their mind formulating what their next question is. And it's not really coming from a place of true curiosity. They might just be thinking, well, people like to talk about themselves, so I'll ask them questions and then they can talk about themselves, and that'll help them, help me ingratiate myself into them. But perceptive people can pick up on that. And you can tell, is this question coming from a place of authentic curiosity, or is this some manipulation? And so, but if you come from a genuine place in your heart of true curiosity, and just the desire to understand another person, that's the place to come from. And if you can come from that place, you can ask good questions. And if you can listen to the answers, and be thoughtful about it. And I met another unique human, who's become someone who's become, kind of a guide for me in my life. I don't even want to use the word mentor, because that's not quite the right word. If he's a mentor, I'll call him a spiritual mentor.
Okay.
And the day I met him, he was speaking at a conference, and I was also speaking at the conference, and we were speaking back to back. So we each sat in on the other person's lecture. And it was a 30 under 30 conference. So there's 30 very accomplished entrepreneurs in the room, all in their 20s. And he went, I think he went before me. And he said, okay, here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like the 30 of you to split off into, pairs. So 15 pairs of two. And he said, person A, I want you to spend 2.5 minutes. We're going to have 5 minutes for each conversation. So person A, whoever that is, you guys pick. For the first 2.5 minutes, I just want you to talk about something that you're currently struggling with. And he said, now here's what I want person B to do. He said, I want you to, while person A is talking, just try to focus on where in your body do you feel what this person is saying to you. Where are the sensations in your occurring? He said, now let me tell you what I don't want you to do. He said, while person A is talking, what I don't want you to do is to think of, oh, I have something like their story relates to a story I can tell, and maybe my story and their story can get together and have little story babies. He said,
Uh-huh.
don't do that. And when he finished saying that, what went through my mind was he just described every human conversation that has ever happened. Like, that's what we do. When one person's talking, we're thinking about what we're going to say, and, oh, I can relate what I want to say to what they just said. And it was very moving to me and very powerful that his focus was on receiving, listening, absorbing in your body what this other person is saying. It was a very powerful lesson for me, and I'm honored to call him a friend and someone that I'm still in touch with, also almost a decade later.
It's intriguing because this is one of the typical tool that a coach, especially a life coach, is using. So typically, a life coach needs to be very curious and has to have a lot of critical thinking. That I guess is the step after curiosity. If you are genuine in your curiosity, and then typically you connect the emotion of a conversation with your coachee with what you feel inside, so that you can fine tune your soul with the soul of the coachee and be empathic with him. And this is a powerful technique that, if leveraged properly with the 5 whys, it can get out a lot of deep, deep emotional trauma in a coachee. And it's intriguing that you have touched on it because it's one of the power tools that I use almost with every CEO I have under my coachee. And it's beautiful to see how people that they have so much authority and power, they are still fragile inside. And
Absolutely.
it's something that not everybody is ready to admit. And it's beautiful to see that people, despite gender, despite culture, despite age, they can still cry for the error or mistakes that they have committed.
I agree. I would say all of us, everyone has trauma is a word that is a very loaded word, and some people aren't comfortable with that word, or they only want to use that word for rape or for things that, like, we can all agree are universally traumatic. um I have a more personally a more expansive view of that word, in the sense that obviously some traumas are more severe and other traumas are less severe. I would just say we have all been traumatized by the human condition of growing up as humans, and we have we have all had unmet needs. We have all been raised by imperfect parents who did the best they could, but were not always able to meet our needs. And so it's now what I would say is, I for me, I sort of began a spiritual journey about 4 years ago. And so in some ways I feel like I'm a little baby. I'm a 4-year-old on my little, spiritual quest. um but what I've learned so much during these 4 years is accepting that some of the traumas that maybe I had ignored, or that I hadn't fully faced or appreciated about my childhood or my adulthood, or other things, struggles that I have encountered. And and I think for the society, our society is, I mean, I think I could say this and it's not a controversial thing to say. I think if our society were a person, we would think of them as a profoundly unhealthy person. Um,
Yes,
if society were a person, we would say they are struggling with addiction. They, have maybe the wrong priorities. Maybe they care a little too much about what other people think of them. I mean, you could say a lot of things that would be true. And um, so the in fact, there's a quote, I'm gonna quickly look up so I can give it to you. It's one of my all-time favorite quotes. And let's see here. um, it goes, let's see, it is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society.
yes,
and and the thing about that is, I'll give you an example. There are certain very unhealthy habits, addictions even, that society celebrates. So
yes.
society celebrates work addiction. Society celebrates workaholism. And and
Success
so
in
and
general.
you Right. And you have people that might be terrible people or deeply unhealthy in lots of ways. But if they're financially successful or professionally successful, society says they're successful.
Yes.
And, um, and so, you know, to me, one of the things as I've gone down this spiritual path that occurred to me was there's essentially there's two different worlds that I found were very incompatible, and there was not a lot of overlap between those two worlds. One was the business world, and the other was the spiritual world. And those two didn't really talk to each other. And the business people thought the spiritual people were a bunch of hippy dippy wackos, and the spiritual people thought that the business people were a bunch of blood sucking vampires. And and so
Yes.
there was not a
Good
lot of
picture.
and so um and what I realized as I went down my own, spiritual path was I wanted to sort of help build a bridge between those two different worlds, um, and for there to be more overlap between them. I wanted to see a world with more spiritual CEOs, and so that's where I developed this idea or concept of being a karmapreneur. And so my thought was, first of all, I started to notice something in some of the founders that I was meeting, which was like, I'll frame it this way. Um, Most people probably listening to this have heard of, Simon Sinek and Start with Why, and the beautiful work that he's done. And 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 I love his book and his TED Talk and the message that he's delivering. And just a quick summary of it for those who may not be familiar, essentially that you have three main questions. What do you do? We sell, electronic, nicotine vaping devices. Well, how do you do it? Well, that's a little more complicated, to match the pharmacokinetic delivery of nicotine in the bloodstream of a combustion cigarette through vaporization technology to match, that delivery with, getting the chemistry just right and the vaporization and the heating just right. Okay. Why? Why do you do what you do? And and I could say, well, the World Health Organization said 1 billion people were going to die this century from smoking, and nicotine's not carcinogenic. Nicotine doesn't kill people. It's the delivery system. That's what was toxic and killing people. So if we could deliver nicotine to the, 1.3 billion people on the planet who are already addicted to it, but without this thing called cancer and heart disease and all of these terrible things, that's an enormous public health opportunity, but also they're spending about $1 trillion a year on their tobacco habits. So it's also a good economic opportunity. And Simon Sinek said, start with why. That's actually the most important question, and you should start with that. And what I noticed over these last few years is a lot of, especially millennials today, and Gen Z as well, they actually care a lot more about the how. And the
Yeah.
how is actually very important. And the crude analogy I always like to give, or the crude example, is I could say to you, Michelle, um, I always give money to homeless people. What I do is when I drive by, I throw my change at them as hard as I can. And
Yeah.
it's like,
A good
well,
way to arm them with money.
right. And so it's like, well, the how matters, right? How you do what you do matters. And so I started to notice that some of the entrepreneurs that I was investing in, they were really doing the how very well. They were treating their employees well. They were treating their customers well. They were treating their vendors well. And and so to me, a karmapreneur is someone who is they're doing good, but not from a place of like, oh, the only karmapreneurs are people who are working on the environment. No, that's not, my perspective. My perspective is, one, you could sell French fries, one of the companies that we invested in, um, and and still be a karmapreneur. Again, if you're treating your people well, your customers well, your vendors well, you're doing the right thing, you're not cutting corners, you're not trying to screw anybody, and I felt like that was part of the intersection of the people who felt like you can do good and make money. They're not mutually exclusive. And so, um, so that's kind of in some ways, what I want to see more of and what I'd like to help cultivate is, and there's a good comparison for this, which was like 10 or 15 years ago, there was this new concept in business called win-win. Before win-win, if you and I were in a business arrangement, if I got a good deal, that meant you got a bad deal, or vice versa. There was no such thing as, it was always win-lose. And then this new idea of win-win. No, no, no. The best arrangement is where you both feel like you've won. And those are the only kinds of agreements you should be trying to reach. And that really took hold and has become an accepted mainstream business view today. And
Yes.
similarly, I want to see this idea of the way you do things, treating people the right way, doing good in that way and making money can go actually very much hand in hand.
I totally agree with that, as we have discussed when we were doing our pre-screening. It's also mainstream, finally, what you just said, the win to win. People, they know it as the Robert Cialdini ethical persuasion, and is the first principle of reciprocity. So, has to be a victory for both parties in a negotiation. It's not a negotiation that I win it, you lose it. So I get everything and you get nothing. And returning to your point of this new millennial and Gen Z, yes, absolutely. I observe exactly the same. They have inner purposes, but they are more focused on the how. And as you know, as a trainer of martial arts, if there is something that I understood in these 40 plus years of training, is that the purpose, the why, is what helps you to stand in a fight, even if you are in a loose position. If you know only how to fight, you will get a blow that knock you down. But if you have the why, you have the purpose to get up, you will get up and you will continue to fight until maybe you will get eventually a KO and then you wake up in the hospital. But at the end, the fight is ended when you are not able anymore to fight. And if you have purpose as a this mindset as a CEO, then you are unstoppable because you can
I
fight with radical candor and coaching. You can get your people to understand your position. You can understand their position with empathy, and then you can seed karma with reciprocity. So everybody is getting almost what you have done with enjoy. So you, you step up in a position that was uncomfortable and you succeed with it.
Well, and I appreciate that, and I can tell you, when I remember gathering my employees together at Enjoy, and we were not permitted to make therapeutic claims about our product from in any of our marketing. We all knew the truth, which was that this was, you know, somewhere between 100 and 1,000 times better than smoking a cigarette, for a smoker. But we weren't allowed to talk about that in terms of marketing claims. And there were over 100 peer-reviewed scientific journal studies that supported the health benefits. And so when I gathered the employees together, I could speak honestly to them because this wasn't an external marketing message. And I said, make no mistake, there are people walking on the earth today who, but for our efforts, would be taking their last breath in an ICU in 20 or 30 years from now, who are instead going to be on the front porch watching their grandkids play. And because of the work that we're doing here. And um, I believed that. And I think a lot of our employees believed that we were, doing incredibly important work. In fact, early this year, a scientific peer-reviewed publication came out in which two scientists reviewed all of the data of smoking rates, and they determined that our victory against the FDA and the ensuing innovation that followed, based on the data, has so far resulted in 1 million human life years saved.
Yes.
So that's probably the single thing I'm most proud of in terms of what I've accomplished, in this, sort of in my time here. And I think that, that that why is very powerful. And when you have it and you believe in it, and to your point, and then you can devote yourself to the craft of the how, and you can accomplish great things. One of the stories I read was one of the Israeli hostages who was murdered by Hamas in captivity was an American, this guy named Hirsch, and one of the hostages who got released said that Hirsch sort of saved his life and many other people's lives by, as they were all suffering in these, tunnels being starved by Hamas. His line, he modified a philosophy from Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, which was, he was a Holocaust survivor who had written this book, and he said, if you if you understand your why, you will figure out the how.
Yes.
And it was a very important message for those people of, their why was, why do you want to live? Right? What's worth living for? And if you can figure out what that is and really hold on to that, then you'll figure out the how to survive, to get to that life that you want to cherish. Um, so I think it's a similar thing. The why, when I guest lecture at the business school here, I say the why is kind of like falling in love. If you're at a job and I say, do you love your job? Are you passionate about what you do? And you go, I'm not sure. Well, then you're not in love, right? Like, it's not a gray thing. You're not in the middle, right?
Yep.
So I typically say, keep looking, because I spent 10 years as a patent attorney, and it wasn't that I was miserable, but I was not passionate. I was not filled with happiness and love and fulfillment. And it was only once I became an entrepreneur that I felt alive and felt, oh my gosh, this is what I need to be doing with my life. And early on, when we were still very much struggling and it wasn't clear if this was going to be a successful story, I remember a friend of mine said, so if this entrepreneur thing doesn't work out, you'll just go back to being a patent attorney. And I was like, no way. Like, my most boring day as an entrepreneur in 6 months has been more exciting than my most exciting day in 10 years as a lawyer. I will never go back. And so, um, but I didn't know until I had the experience. And so I, it's my wish for all of us, for my kids and for everybody else, to find their passion and to be able to live that passion to the best of their ability.
This is beautiful because it's connecting again with the principle of Buddhism and the principle of the Japan of the Ikigai. So you have a talent, you have a passion, you work with that passion provides you money, and the outcome of your work is creating well-being for everybody. And it's beautiful how, at the end, despite culture, religion, and geopolitical situation that I don't want even to discuss because they're way bigger than me, everything at the end reset to we need to make stuff for good, moving us out of our comfort zone with our passion. And this is amazing. And we arrive to the tough topic of the discussion, AI, software, and your way of doing investment on consumer. Because I have a question here in my pocket that I was holding back. I was working for IBM for a long time as well. And I went through a lot of discussion about patents and other kind of stuff. I have very, very few memories of patents related to software. And instead coming from a background in Formula One, MotoGP, or automotive in general, as an electrotechnical robotic engineer, tons of memories about patents on whatever, from the common rail injection from Bosch to the fire engine of Fiat or a ladder. I can continue for hours about patents on the normal industry. But I don't have on top of my mind a patent about software. And this is a question that I have for you with the wealth of experience that you have as an attorney and as an entrepreneur and now as a venture capital. Why, in your opinion, software is so difficult to make profitable? Why is so volatile? At the end, how many patents do you have in your experience as an owner in software? A lot, and I don't see them, or only a few?
No, there are a lot actually in software. So the legal
Mhm.
standard is there's three things that you need to be able to get a utility patent, which
Mhm.
is your idea has to be novel or new. Obviously, it's got to be new. It has to be non-obvious. So it can't just be that the only difference between yours and what else is out there is a very small modification. Oh, they use one kind of plastic, I use a different kind of plastic. That's obvious, right? So it's got to be new, it's got to be non-obvious. And then the third is it has to provide utility, right? So it's got to be beneficial in some way. And so there's plenty of software patents that check all three of those boxes. And now the hardest box to overcome is the non-obvious one, because presumably they're not in my office if they don't have something that hasn't been useful in some way. So usually the things have utility. And and usually it's new. They're not coming in and saying, "Hey, I saw this at the store," right? It's new in the sense that they've come up with it. The challenge is that, okay, it's new, but is it new enough? Is it new in a way that is truly non-obvious? And so the and it's a tricky business. My One of my favorite quotes on this issue, I actually learned when I was in law school. There was a very famous patent case, and I want to say it was like might have been in the 1800s, like 150 years ago or so. But the whenever you hear about patent lawsuits or patent infringement or patent litigation, almost all of the time, the entire argument is the patent shouldn't have been granted because it was obvious, and the patent should be invalidated because it was actually obvious based on what was out there at the time. And so this very famous patent case from the 1800s, the person who was the defendant, who was arguing that the patent should have been invalidated because it was obvious, basically said, look, all the inventor did was just combine some things that were already out there in the world.
Okay.
And the judge said something, it's one of my all-time favorite quotes. He said, only God invents from nothing. Like,
Yeah.
the the rest of us have to combine things that are already out there, you know, like, and so that of course we're all combining things that are already out there. The question is, are you doing it in a non-obvious way? And so, but just because you're combining things doesn't mean it's obvious. You might be combining things that no one ever thought to combine before. And so, um, and I think, there's obviously so much discussion now about AI and how things are changing. I'm I'm a believer that AI is going to cause even more disruption than people think. I think it's going to change our species. I think it's going to I don't think any of us truly understand how disruptive it's going to be and how much we're going to all in 10 years from now look back and just be like, "Oh my god, I can't believe it was back in the stone age before AI." Um, and
Yes.
so that said, I've also been thinking about AI from the opposite view. And so when I say the opposite view, what I mean is, I read an interview many, many, many years ago with Jeff Bezos, and he said, someone asked him about trying to predict the future. What's coming down in 10 years from now, and he said, what we do at Amazon's the opposite. We say, what do we know will not be true in 10 years from now? And we say, well, we know our customers aren't going to want to pay more for their products and they're not going to want to get them slower. So everything we focus on is faster and cheaper because we know that's not changing in 10 years from now. And
Yes.
and so similarly, one of the lenses with which I look at AI is, what is AI not going to change? And so I say, well, I don't think AI is going to cause people to stop buying diapers or French fries, right? To use my French fry company. And and so I don't think AI is cutting people's hair anytime soon. I don't think AI is performing root canals. So there's a lot of things that I think AI is not going to disrupt. I don't think AI is replacing plumbers or electricians or air conditioning repair people anytime soon. A lot of those trades are not going away, at least not for, 10, 15, 20 years till the robots can do some of those things. And, and so what's interesting is consumer is still about human psychology. And it's still about that, the person who got this, I think, better than anybody was Steve Jobs. He really understood this idea of delighting the customer, of creating something that felt like magic to the customer. And delighting is a human experience, right? That surprise, that, oh, wow, that's so clever. They thought of everything. And so humans will always have an advantage in understanding other humans because we have these things called feelings and emotions that, AI might do a very good job of mimicking. AI is never going to understand what it's like to bury a parent or to fall in love or to pull an all-nighter or, in your case, to get punched in the face or, all of those things. AI is just not going to understand any of those things because those are human experiences.
Until we don't have a neurological hormonal system that translates the hormones and chemistry into bits, AI cannot understand it. Can
That's right.
mimicking it maybe with some algorithm, but it's not a endocrinology system.
That's right. And our system, you know, is, I mean, as we all kind of feel, being human is a unique experience, and certainly one that I'm continuously learning about in terms of learning about myself and others. And so, again, AI is not going to understand w- what it means to fall in love or break your heart or see a beautiful sunset or all of these very human things. And so, um, I still think about that. And again, AI is going to replace a ton of stuff. There's no question about it.
Yep.
Um, but in many ways, I think the soft skills are going to become even more important. Whether that's genuine, authentic curiosity or other things like that are going to become very important. Those social skills and making people feel welcome. Those are going to be very important qualities.
Yes, absolutely. And it's beautiful the direction that you took with this discussion because AI is for sure something that will revolutionize how we live. Especially because if we go back to the principle of Amazon and Jeff Bezos, what won't change in the human interaction is how we communicate with others. And the AI is indeed based on the LLM, so large language models. That is a vector, indeed, how we communicate. And indeed, is the vector how a lot of hype is around the actual venture capital in AI, because people, founders, entrepreneurs that have a good pitch are able to sell to venture capital that have technical skills stuff that believe could be amazing to sell, but they don't have the why and the how written in a way that is a win-to-win with real reciprocity. And here is the clash between the hype and what it will come next year, most probably, when people will understand with a lot of failing and a lot of people that will go on the street for beg for money because they have lost everything they had in the past, that AI was not that good for that kind of idea. So hopefully it will be the typical curve of adoption that people will understand that AI is really good in discussing, letting you feel understood. And I was looking at some research lately where an analysis of which are the tokens, the topics that are typically discussed with AI, general AI. And it was beautiful to see that a lot of people are using AI like the best friend, or like the psychologist, or like a coach. That means to me, in the era of social network where everybody is super connected to the point that people are doing a porn food picture of whatever they eat for lunch, breakfast, dinner, whatsoever, they are not able to talk with their neighbor or with their parents or with their relative or with their husband, wife. And to me, it's shocking. Is this something that you are witnessing with the founders that you have in your company? And that is probably also is one of the reasons why you are more oriented toward consumer instead of toward fintech or SaaS.
I mean, I wouldn't say that I've seen it yet with, my founders, just because AI is still relatively new.
Uh-huh.
But I would say that the way I look at the sort of the way I look at AI is I mean, again, it's much bigger to me than what the internet did for us, but I look at it as an extraordinarily powerful tool, and like any tool, you can go and buy a hammer and you can build a house, or you can hit somebody over the head with it, right? So it's a very, very powerful tool. So it can be used to build, and it can be used to destroy. Um, and I think with respect to there's a lot of benefits. What's really interesting is the the children who are being born today in the world that are literally, I think, starting this year in 2025 is generation beta. And this is the generation that is growing up on AI, right? And
Uh-huh.
so my kids who are teenagers are technically Gen Z. But in the middle of their education, AI came out.
Yes.
So, for example, my daughter, I dropped her off for her first day of sophomore year of high school today, and she was asking about, I think geometry. She's concerned about geometry, and I said, well, you have this new tool that you didn't used to have, and I said you can say to ChatGPT, not just explain whatever it is that you're struggling with in geometry, but you can say, explain it to someone who's a sophomore in high school, who's struggling and doesn't really understand the basic concepts. Like, you can prompt it to teach it to you just the way that you need to learn it. And I wouldn't have said that to her 2 years ago, because that wouldn't have made that it didn't exist. And so she has access now to an extraordinarily powerful tool, maybe the best tutor on the planet, that she has access to, and as long as she prompts it correctly. And so I think it's the same with respect to, I actually think there are going to be benefits to mental health by having essentially AI therapists who've, because imagine the AI can read every mental health book, every mental health scientific study that's published in every language in the world every day, right? I mean, the ability to understand so much. I think, for example, I think by the end of this decade, most people will be seeing some kind of an AI doctor. I think medical AI is
Yes.
very well suited for. Um, Mental health, I still think it's going to be very helpful, because part of what we all universally want is to feel understood. And maybe AI is mimicking that, but it can still say the words that make you feel understood. And that's an important quality. And so, and look, not all mental health professionals and doctors are excellent, right? One of my favorite jokes about that is, do you know what you call a person who finishes last in their class in medical school? Doctor. So, uh, so so people complain about the errors and mistakes that AI is making, and it is making errors and mistakes for sure.
Yes.
But it reminds me of when people complain about self-driving cars getting into an accident. It's like, humans are killing about 50,000 people a year just in the United States in cars. So if AI is going to kill less than 50,000, that's a benefit to society. And so the standard isn't AI can never kill a single person in a car. the standard is 50,000 people are dying every year in this country in car accidents. And if AI can cut that in half or cut that by 90%, that's a huge, incredible benefit. And so it's the same thing, I think, with some of the other errors is directionally, is it better than what's out there? Okay, that's the standard.
What you're touching is intriguing indeed, because a lot of people, they have a lot of research claiming that AI is the evil or is the god that will save everything, that will destroy everything. I'm an engineer, so I use data. What I understood is that AI is amazing to discuss with you because it's based on a large language model. Living in Europe as an Italian, talking in English, living in a country that speaks Slovaks, and I have all the neighbors that speak different languages. I have tested AI on multiple engines to understand, okay, can I have a discussion with somebody that is speaking Hungarian? Boom, I have it. And it was flawless. Can I translate this legal document from English that I put the draft into Slovakian? Boom, did. I sent it to my lawyer. This is the draft. And he asked me, hey, buddy, how the heck have you created this? So there are applications where AI, if you are able to prompt and scope the frame of the job in a narrow canvas, has very little hallucination. But of course, if you are broadening the canvas to a gigantic picture, you cannot expect AI to become Michelangelo because it doesn't have the creativity, the mastery, and the craftsmanship. But is the AI that is wrong, or is the pattern of I have an hammer and I see nails everywhere? Because this is what the market, I guess, is facing nowadays. Everything is AI. I am expecting to see AI even in the trash bin in a while. That will tell you, hey, buddy, you don't have to put this in this can, but in the other because it's plus. So, and these are stuff that sooner or later they will arrive to help people to understand how to behave. Because if there is something that as a behavioral passionate, I'm looking and overseeing in people and organization, that organization and people are failing in their social interaction due to misbehaviors. And so if AI is a tool to help people to have a private and safe discussion with a assistant that is maybe not a doctor, but something similar that goes through a healthcare protocol where the doctor is certified that is safe, and we can use it and provide it for free, for instance. Isn't that better than having what we have today? People
Absolutely.
misbehaving, looking at role models that are totally toxic. And there is the last question that I have for you.
Please.
So, in your opinion, why all these technological advancement, like it was cloud, like it was Dockerization, Kubernetes later, and nowadays AI, they didn't went to a patent. So why OpenAI wasn't able to put AI under a patent?
Well, I mean, I'm sure they have lots of patents on various aspects of the technology. Um,
Me
I
too.
think, you know, I would say this though. Well, first of all, patents are very interesting. They've changed quite a bit. About 15 years ago, there was a landmark
Mhm.
U.S. Supreme Court case that really defanged patents. They made them far less valuable because up until the Supreme Court case, it was much easier to get an injunction. So if I had a patent and you were infringing on it, I could get an injunction to prevent you from selling your product. And after this big case in 2010, it was more like if you were infringing my patent, I could get reasonable royalties from you, but I couldn't really stop you from selling your product. And so it just made patents a lot less valuable. And at the end of the day, the winner is going to be the people who provide the best product. It's not going to be the people who have the patents. It's going to, I always say, even though I was a patent attorney, my view today is that the most valuable form of intellectual property is actually the trademark. It's not the patent. It's because the trademark's the brand. And
Yes.
and so people don't buy, smartphones, they buy iPhones. They don't buy, tissues, they buy Kleenex. It's people buy brands. They don't buy products for the most
Yes.
part. And that's that comes down to, as you know, you're an engineer. Betamax was a better technology than VHS, but VHS won, right? And so there's plenty of examples of that in our society where the best technology lost, and the winning technology had a better brand, or all sorts of other sort of aspects. So I think it's the same thing with AI. I think there'll be some patents and everything, but ultimately the marketplace is going to determine the winner, or winners, plural, based on who's doing the best job of meeting the customer's needs.
Okay. So I have a follow-up because this is what I'm thinking since long time ago. So in this new environment where at the end patents are not useful like they were in the past to prevent competitors to go ahead in the competition, and the game is changed to a more open source oriented protocol. Isn't this related again to the karma and the karmanship concept, where people join together in a sort of open source community with a reciprocity for everybody in the game, where they get a gain in advancement of the technology, but because it's a community stuff, it's not anymore a proprietary, as it was, for instance, the mainframe for IBM. So if we are able to develop a open source model, like could be the model of DeepSeek or something else, but a model that is really a community-wise, where all the intelligence of the humankind join together in elevate this product. Isn't this most probably the new way of doing venture capital and organization?
Well, I think we're going to see both, right? So you see Apple is a closed system and Android is an open system, right? And so I think you're going to see both models. And and if you said today, what's the better model? The closed Apple system or the open Android system? Depends on who you ask, right? So different people would give different answers to that question. And certainly Apple believes that its closed system is a superior system. And I'm sure, Google believes that Android's open system is a superior system. So I think you'll see open systems and you'll see closed systems. And I think you'll have proponents and advocates in both camps. And, um, but the, the economy is a very good barometer for what's the winner, right? Up until recently, Apple was the most valuable company in the world, so maybe their approach was the better approach, as evidenced by their market cap. You know, um, and so you'll see the same thing with AI, and we don't know who the winners are going to be. I think so much of AI today reminds me of like the early 1990s with the internet. I remember, I'm sure you do too, using Netscape. And I
Yes.
could have told you at the time the a visual browser is going to be how we're all going to interact with this new technology called the internet. But I couldn't have told you that Netscape was going to be the winner. And so fast forward to, 30 years later, we're all using visual browsers, but no one's using Netscape, right? So they're using Chrome or Safari or, whatever. And so I think that it's the same thing with AI. AI is going to be the winner. I couldn't tell you, is it going to be OpenAI? Is it going to be DeepSeek? Is it going to be Anthropic? Is it going to be one of these other companies? It's still too early. We're still in the early stages.
Yes. And I guess it's like in combat. At the end, if you don't have a contender, you fight and do shadow boxing. So this dichotomy that has to be some organization that are deeply focused on profits and other organization that are instead deeply focused on community. This creates this challenge between two worlds that can spark indeed creativity and good results.
Yeah, and I like your idea about, the community aspect, and even with respect to investing. And there are some platforms that are a little more oriented towards maybe collective investing, but um, I think venture as a category is actually going through its own disruption today and change, and I think it's going to
Yes.
continue to change and evolve. And I think there will be new, you know, new paradigms and new ways to invest. And there's probably going to be, AI powered venture, just like you have in the stock market today. So much of the trading is algorithmic trading, with these
Yes.
quantitative computers making the trades. So I think you see some of that also in venture at some point.
I totally agree on that. But I have my takeaway on this, and this related to what you said at the beginning. So, was your radical candor plus the experience of a coach that helped you to step out of your autonomy and becoming an entrepreneur? I believe that the future of venture capital are venture studio that are able to combine experience of people that they made the journey through the venture to have a company that was a unicorn or even not a unicorn, but a company that was healthy. Because I guess that healthy is better than profitable because it means that it's sustainable. And these kind of venture studio that have a coaching platform inside that is capable to provide the soft and hard skill for a company to grow and scale in a sustainable way, they will become the game changer, especially with the disruption that AI will cause because AI came to the table and did poker to everybody. Was all in since last year almost, looking at the report.
It's true. Yeah, no, I think it's all coming, and there's going to be a ton more disruption in many industries, including investing and others as well. And but I think you're right, because that mentorship and human piece of um, like there's so many times in business and in life where your instincts are wrong. Your intuition is wrong. And you think it's
Yes,
right and you feel it's right. And then you might talk to someone who's a little older than you and they say, you know what? I tried that because I thought that was the right thing too. And it didn't work. And here's why it didn't work. And then you're like, oh, wow, I'm so glad I didn't do that. That would have been a disaster. So that happens all the time. You don't get that unless you talk to someone who's maybe walked that path before you, you
exactly.
know.
And looking at all the interview we have done so far, Craig, the larger majority of venture capital and private equity, they don't have an IT due diligence to assess, hey, but these founders, they have only a good pitch or they have also a solid asset that can scale. Because if you look to invest in a company that in 3 years you want to sell out and disinvest, but the time to live of the software that they have is less than 2 years due to the technical debt, then you can find out that the third year, instead of being profitable, is a heck of a journey. This kind of stuff you can avoid with the right craftsmanship in your board or in your advisory team that is capable to cooperate and co-work with these founders. Not that many are doing that. And so I believe that in the future we will get there. Also, because it seems that a lot of people that are preaching for code assistant, after a lot of tests, what they realize is that code assistant without the human factor, so in a hybrid model where you provide this gorgeous tool to people that they know how to build software properly, cannot work alone. So an agent alone cannot do that much. It's like a junior developer so far. So these kind of stuff are most probably the future. They will evolve. They will change in something that is unpredictable. But it's like a vector to move from one riverside to the other. In the middle is AI. Today we are here on the left side of the river. We need to cross it. And probably is what the venture is failing so far, because how many are able to assist as an advisor or not executive director, companies, boards, investors in this journey? There are so many charlatans out there that they preach that they are AI expert that until the last 2 days before they were selling French fries. Start to your company.
Yep, it's true.
And I met a lot of them. People with gorgeous titles in LinkedIn, and then you start to have a tough discussion as engineers, and then suddenly they put the card on the table and say, sorry, I was doing sales until 3 weeks ago. Good. Good. But you are a top voice on LinkedIn. Yeah. I use my sales skill to become a top voice. Okay, good. Intriguing.
There's a lot of that out there. I agree.
Yes. That is not what the market needs and is not what our society, unfortunately, is looking for. But is the fate of hype, I guess.
It's true. It's true. Well, I've really very much enjoyed our conversation. I think we covered all the topics we had hoped to cover before we spoke today. Unless you have any other final questions.
No, I really love the conversation, everything we have talked about. I have plenty of questions still in the pocket. We would have a discussion of 3 hours, and this is a podcast that typically is around 1 hour, and we went literally the extra mile with you. That means we had a good time. Good. Craig, thank you so much. I hope to see you soon with new discoveries, with new lesson learned from your journey. And it was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Pleasure was mine, and hopefully I'll make my way to Italy at some point so we can meet in person. And of course, you're welcome here in Arizona anytime.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Craig. And listener, thank you for being here. Please like, subscribe, smash comments below. And hope that you have found this conversation really insightful. And if you want to know more or to collaborate with Craig, you can ping him. I will put all the link in the description below. See you in the next episode. Craig, thank you so much. See you soon.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening, and please remember to subscribe to the Forge of Unicorns to stay up to date with our latest episodes.